If you want to know all about Andy Warhol, just look at the surface of my paintings and films and me. And there I am. There's nothing behind it.
Andy Warhol, an artist who his entire life provocatively asserted that he only existed on the surface, that he was just a personality devoid of history and emotions. Hiding behind half-truths and genuine lies, Andy Warhol chose to wear a mask all his life.
La personnalité de Warhol, jamais il ne s'abandonne. Jamais il ne s'abandonne. Ça, il faut savoir ça. Il truque pour qu'on ne sache pas qui il est. Il faut forcer le secret.
Il y a toujours un jeu entre, d'un côté, la simplicité d'un énoncé, d'une peinture, d'une image, et quelque chose de beaucoup plus complexe que l'on découvre petit à petit.
The whole world knows his famous paintings of Campbell's soup tins and the multiple portraits of Marilyn Monroe. His face is his signature, and it has made him a star. He is one of the most famous artists of the 20th century. And yet, very few people know the man hidden behind the artist. If we go back to the childhood of the man then known as Andrew Warhol, we discover a complex being, influenced by family traditions, popular culture and religion.
I don't think it comes down to one piece of art. If he wasn't religious, I just think that a greater part of the theme of his art would be different.
C'est important de comprendre cette pratique culturelle de la religion. Il est évident que d'une certaine façon, les vraies origines de Warhol, elles sont à chercher de ce côté-là.
From these miscellaneous influences, which were so deeply rooted in him, he fashioned a unique world, an artistic and philosophic world, but also a cold one. His work is disturbing in its simplicity, and it's in direct confrontation with the upheaval of his time. Andrei Warhol, Andy Warhol's father, settled in Pittsburgh in 1912. He was joined several years later by his wife Julia, newly arrived from her native Slovakia. They came here to find work, lured by the promise of this land of freedom. Pittsburgh was the capital of the coal and steel industry, and its chimneys formed an imposing industrial landscape. This urban environment was frighteningly modern. The city was constantly expanding and became the symbol of a country destined to build the new century.
Pittsburgh was known for a very industrial city. Steel was very big here in Pittsburgh. Steel mills, they run every day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 365 days a year. They don't shut down at all. And you can see it's very visible. There's flames coming out, there's smoke.
Pittsburgh, c'est la ville des très grands écarts. Il y a d'un côté les Frick, les Mellon, les Carnegie, c'est-à-dire les très grandes familles américaines qui ont pour partie construit matériellement les États-Unis, enfin la côte est américaine, et de l'autre côté, il y a tous les travailleurs.
Where Uncle Andy lived was mainly a lot of immigrant workers who came over, so that would be the poor side of town.
But the crash in 1929 brought the machines to a standstill, and one by one, the factories closed down. The youngest Warholer, Andrew, was only 1 year old, so his father, André, took any job he could get. In the coal mines, in the steelworks, on building sites, he worked non-stop, relentlessly.
André was a hard worker. He was often away from home, and sometimes he would even have to travel, and he wouldn't be home for days on end. But it was just his way. He was a workaholic.
When he came home, he was exhausted, you know, and he would just go to sleep, eat, go to sleep, and get up and do it all over again. And it was mainly just, you know, to support the family and to survive. You know, my grandfather didn't have hobbies. He didn't golf or he didn't do any. His hobby was his family.
Andy's parents responded to poverty by seeking solace in spirituality, by observing their religious traditions. Every Sunday, this little boy would accompany his parents and his two big brothers through the soulless streets of the city. Come rain or snow, they walked the 10 kilometers to church. The Byzantine Catholic Church of St. John Chrysostom.
My grandmother was very religious, and she required that everybody in the family go to church and, you know, say their prayers. The religious, you know, segment of Catholicism, it's called the Byzantine Catholic.
An incongruous island in the midst of a sea of greyness, this church in Pittsburgh was etched on little Andy's imagination.
You walk into the church and you're totally stimulated. Your eyes are stimulated by all the beautiful, wonderful icons, by the gold screens, the dome, the stained glass windows. There was a very beautiful Byzantine Catholic Rusyn chant that the parishioners would sing, and again, very pleasing to the ears, as well as the use of incense. It's based off of sort of the premise of heaven on earth. So when you walk into the church, you're surrounded by beauty and this beautiful scent and this beautiful chant.
Andy was fascinated by these pious images. Opposite him, above the altar, was a painting of Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper.
I like to joke around where Uncle Andy was maybe sitting in church as a little boy and seeing maybe an icon of Jesus and thinking, boy, that would really be neat if we could put Marilyn or Shirley Temple up there.
30 years later, Andrew Warholer, who had become Andy Warhol, painted his most famous painting, Gold Marilyn Monroe, based on these religious icons. In it, the actress is immortalized as a saint on a gold background, her features simplified by blocks of color. In 1934, Andy's father, André, finally found a permanent job. The Warholers' situation improved, and they moved into this house, a stone's throw from their church. This house became a bubble for Andy, protecting him from the outside world.
Andrew Warhol est un enfant un petit peu spécial, très différent de ses deux frères aînés, qui sont robustes, qui jouent au foot, qui jouent vraiment bien leur rôle de garçon. Lui, il est né de constitution plutôt fragile. Il est affligé très rapidement d'une maladie nerveuse qu'on appelle la danse de Saint-Guy. Le sujet de cette maladie ne maîtrise tout simplement pas ni ses mouvements, ni sa parole, et donc ne peut rien faire. Cette maladie l'oblige à ne pas aller à l'école pendant assez longtemps et à rester donc, littéralement dans les jupes de sa mère. Et il est ravi, hein, il passe ses journées à dessiner.
It was mostly Julia, my grandmother, who took care of Andy, and she's the one that was really instrumental in showing him how to draw. I think that's where it all started. You know, I always say that she was probably his biggest influence because she had a very unique artistic way about herself. She had this magical quality.
He would use a soup can and use paper mache to make flowers, and then she would sell those door to door. She would go into some of the more richer neighborhoods.
She was musical, she was artistic, she decorated eggs, she did a lot of sewing. So I think her talent rubbed off on Andy in a big way.
On a installé du coup en deck Andrew Warhol au milieu de la pièce à vivre. Et il est devenu un petit peu le roi qui assistait à tout, voilà, le privilège des grands malades. Cette maladie l'exclut d'une évolution normale de l'enfance à l'adolescence, c'est-à-dire sortir avec des copains, avoir ses premières attractions sexuelles, ses premiers émois amoureux. De tout cela, il était assez retiré. Très tôt, il a eu l'expérience d'être empêché de faire, tout simplement, et donc de regarder, de tout investir dans le regard.
C'est une enfance à la fois dure, difficile parce qu'il est malade, parce qu'il est malingre, parce qu'à l'école on se moque de lui, parce que c'est le fils à maman, et en même temps privilégié parce que sa mère l'enveloppe, le protège, le surprotège même. Et donc là on voit se dessiner une timidité terrible, donc qui va apprendre à dominer. Et donc on peut dire que vraiment que Warhol c'est quelqu'un d'extraordinairement secret, qui a mis un voile devant lui, qui ne veut pas qu'on sache qui il est.
Il y a un lien effectivement entre cet épisode de l'enfance assez déterminant sans doute et le rapport distancié qu'il aura toute sa vie avec les choses. Comme si, effectivement, il regardait la vie de l'autre côté d'une vitre.
Now listen, let's go over there and play that big game I learned in Little Rock. Come on, gather around me, girls. 10, 20, 30, 25.
Besides his home life, Andy only had one form of escapism from the disturbing reality: the cinema. In the 1930s, Hollywood was experiencing a golden age. As the economic crisis dragged on, Americans hid en masse in darkened rooms. By the age of 7, Andrew was a regular cinema-goer.
Et il s'est passionné pour le cinéma, mais comme c'était normal dans les années 30, parce que c'était la période des studios. Et lui, il était fasciné par la petite fiancée de l'Amérique, Charlotte Temple. Il lui envoie un petit mot, et miracle, il reçoit un petit mot de la part de Charlotte Temple. Il l'a montré à tout le monde, il sautait de joie.
He was a true fan, obsessed with this little girl, this child star who had been fashioned by the studios and appeared in all the most popular films.
Le cinéma était pour les enfants de sa génération la fenêtre sur le monde. Et dans ce sens-là, Hollywood avait une capacité de faire rêver dont on n'a sans doute pas une idée très claire aujourd'hui. Et c'est évidemment, pour n'importe quel adolescent, de sa condition, surtout, la vision d'un autre monde, quelque chose qu'il n'a jamais vu, qu'il n'avait jamais imaginé, qui tout d'un coup apparaît à l'écran de façon un peu magique.
Andy's parents realized he would not have the same future as his two brothers who were already in work. Despite their modest salaries, they managed, thanks to a bursary, to enroll him in drawing classes.
Andre, he doesn't come from an elite class. He's not very, educated in art, but he knew there was something special about Uncle Andy, and he knew that, that it was worth to save as much money as he possibly could to ensure that Uncle Andy would go to college. And even to go further and to make that prediction that you're going to be proud of Andy someday.
Andre didn't live to see his son's success. In 1942, he died suddenly, poisoned by contaminated water on a building site. Andy was 14. Deeply affected and incapable of confronting his father's death, he refused to go to the funeral. Three years later, he did his father proud and got into Carnegie Tech University. There he did courses in applied arts, design and graphics. But soon Andy was drawing attention to himself and caused his first scandal with this painting. A self-portrait which he called, "The Broad Gave Me a Face, but I Can Pick My Own Nose." His teachers were divided. He was very close to getting thrown out. But Andrew applied himself, and in 1949 he finally got his diploma. Age 21, despite being anxious about leaving his mother, he realized that if he wanted to live off his art, he had to move. He headed for the new capital of art and the avant-garde, New York. Thanks to steel from Pittsburgh, the city had the world's biggest skyscrapers, such as the Empire State Building. Charlie Parker and Miles Davis played in the city's jazz clubs. And Jackson Pollock, with his abstract expressionism, ruled the contemporary art world. It was also the birthplace of Beat Generation writers such as Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs. On Times Square, Andy stood outside flashy cinema facades where the big stars were on screen. Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, and Marlon Brando. With only $200 in his pocket, Warhol moved to Manhattan. He lived in a small studio flat with a friend who was to become a great painter, Philip Palstein.
Les deux vont à New York et vont donc vivre une petite période de bohème artistique. Ils vont passer de colocation en colocation dans un downtown new-yorkais qui n'est pas du tout celui qu'on connaît aujourd'hui. Tous ces quartiers du bas Manhattan sont des quartiers miteux, mités, pleins de cafards, pas du tout confortables, grouillants de jeunes gens tentant leur chance, mais tout le monde ne va pas réussir. Il va courir les rédactions de magazines de mode avec un carton de dessin. Il séduit immédiatement par son mélange d'élégance, parce qu'il y a de l'élégance, par son mélange de garçons un peu dégingandés, fin fluets. Il séduit donc les rédactrices en chef de Vogue, de Harper's Bazaar, des grands magazines en vogue de l'époque. Notamment celle de Glamour qui lui commande tout de suite une série de dessins et il fait mouche.
As soon as he arrived, Andy got a commission from Glamour magazine for a series of articles entitled "What is Success?" he delivered sketches of rather whimsical women. His drawings caused a sensation, and advertising contracts followed. The swankiest shops in New York called on him to dress their windows. It was around this time that he dropped the last letter of his name and started signing his work Andy Warhol, a much more American name. He became a successful young graphic designer. Then one day, out of the blue, his mother Julia turned up at his apartment.
She came in approximately 1952. It was 2 years after he arrived in New York. She was determined that she would take care of Andy and live with him, and he was okay with that. For the next almost 20 years, she was there in New York doing all his housework and taking care of him at home. And I think she was an important support for him all through those years. And I think that gave him kind of a security that no one else could give him.
In the mornings, Uncle Andy and my grandmother, who I affectionately referred to as Bubba, Uncle Andy and Bubba would kneel down and say a prayer before he left. You say a prayer, it's a dangerous world out there, and you ask for God's protection so that you could come home.
She had this really very interesting handwriting, which was actually just the handwriting that everybody in the region where she came from, they all learned this type of handwriting. This was the standard. To people in New York, it was very odd and strange and kind of fun, and it didn't really fit anything that they knew. It was just so foreign. And all the art directors, they loved this. All of his clients loved it. And pretty soon she was doing entire pieces under Warhol's name. And she actually won 2 professional graphic design awards in New York.
Throughout the 50s, Andy Warhol's work went hand in hand with the dawn of the consumer society. With a string of prizes to his name and admired by his peers, he was now a rich man. Born poor to immigrant parents, he had turned his life around. In 1960, he bought this 4-story house in the city's poshest neighborhood, Upper East Side, near Central Park. As always, his mother followed him and moved into the ground floor. Andy started painting. He had made his fortune, so he could afford to do his own work and turn down advertising commissions. He was making work for himself, trying out new things. At that time, his nephews regularly made the trip from Pittsburgh to see him. Some years later, James Warhol, who had become an illustrator, drew this comic strip based on childhood memories and visits to see his uncle, and of his discovery of Andy Warhol's very first works.
It was just a wonderful space for kids. And a lot of our memories are when we visit him in New York at this townhouse. We remember when he was doing his first soup cans. He's doing these simple images of soup cans. They almost look like advertising art. They didn't look like fine art, but he did them well. So he was hand painting all these images, and we knew it took quite a talent, and we loved watching him do it. He would start working probably around 10 o'clock. He'd be busy all through the day, painting. He'd be listening to music. One point, he realized my brother and I were really good workers, so he put us to work stretching canvases. So we were thrilled to help him stretch canvases at home. He was very exact on how he liked his canvases without any wrinkles, and we were able to do it. So when I was 7 and my brother was 9, we were doing that kind of work. That's when he was doing the paint-by-number paintings or the dance step paintings, the dollar bills. We stretched all those early paintings, and it was pretty thrilling.
The paintings started piling up in the small house. Andy condensed all his influences in his paintings. They contained everything that had shaped his lucid vision of the era. The dollar sign and the Campbell's soup can were almost like religious icons of everyday life.
My mother, she was very direct with my uncle. I know that she didn't think any of it was art. So she didn't really take it too seriously, and she'd tell him. And I actually asked him, why didn't he get rid of all the stuff at home? That was kind of his art. And he's always told her it was really important, that someday it was going to be worth a lot of money. That was one of my uncle's kind of principles, that anything could be art. It doesn't matter what type of subject or what your medium is, anything could be art. I think that was an important principle, and I think that's what he based his early pop art paintings on.
In 1962, he discovered a printing technique which allowed him to reproduce his works ad infinitum on canvas, screen printing. It was a provocative way of turning creativity into production. The traditional art world may have found it shocking, but it opened doors in some urbane and decadent circles. That's when he met Emile de Antonio, an artist agent famous for his intuition. That marked a turning point in Warhol's career as an artist.
Warhol travaille d'arrache-pied et un jour présente deux toiles à Émile de Antonio, qui est très connu dans le milieu, comme une espèce de consultant en fait, de nez. Il lui montre d'abord une toile qui représente une bouteille de coca façon abstraction lyrique, c'est-à-dire donc avec beaucoup de sentiments, donc des dégoulinures, de la gestualité picturale, de l'expression du peintre et de la peinture. Et à côté, il lui présente une autre représentation peinte, mais sans gestualité, sans dégoulinure, d'une bouteille de coca. Et Émile de Antonio lui dit, c'est ça, cette espèce de pureté d'identification au modèle et sans commentaire. Le pop, c'est le sans commentaire. Sa proposition, c'est de produire, c'est d'être dans un système de production, c'est d'explorer la réalité de la quantité. Fabriquer en grande série une image unique. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Dans un contexte où on est complètement submergé par les images. Plus on regarde quelque chose, et moins elle signifie.
In 1962, the critics got carried away. The Campbell soup can paintings were even nicknamed the Mona Lisa of the modern age. Warhol understood that pop art was factual art, the art of the present. His work made radical claims that consumerism and showbiz were the new religions of the 20th century.
Pour réussir à se débarrasser de sa gestualité maniérée, il fallait qu'il se décervelle.
Brought this on himself. I'd feel on safer ground than yours. Whatever you say.
Il fallait qu'il se mette hors de lui, c'est-à-dire hors de sa sensibilité, et devenir une machine, parce que c'est ça, en fait, le projet de Warhol. C'est ni un projet marketing, ça n'est pas une pose, c'est véritablement un objectif artistique, inventer une forme.
At the end of 1962, American pop art was born. As proof of his meteoric rise to fame, almost all of Warhol's works found buyers at this one-man show at the Stable Gallery, one of the best-known galleries in New York. obsessed with the mass media, Warhol compulsively read and collected all the newspapers he could find. On the 4th of June 1962, he came across a front page announcing the death of 129 people in a plane crash. With caustic irony, he painted a huge picture of it over 2 meters square, reappropriating the paper's morbid images.
Pour Warhol, en tout cas, témoin du développement des médias à grande échelle, il est bien évident que cette exploitation de la mort a un caractère presque insoutenable et crucial, révélateur d'une structuration de la société qui passe par une exploitation rarement délicate de la mort. C'est un des traits saillants du monde dans lequel il se trouve, au même titre que la beauté éthérée de Marilyn. Là, encore une fois, on ne peut pas séparer les deux. Je rappelle d'ailleurs que la décision de peindre Marilyn est prise le jour où il apprend son suicide.
NBC Radio News on the Hour, brought to you by the Metropolitan Life Insurance.
Celebrities' sudden deaths, car crashes, racist attacks. Andy Warhol's art is anything but inoffensive.
La peinture est commémorative chez Warhol aussi. Elle est une commémoration de ce qui a disparu à jamais. Elle est une façon, comme dans toute tradition classique, de conserver, de préserver l'image de l'absent. Et les accidents de voiture sont d'autant plus pathétiques que ce sont les images de gens qu'on ne connaît pas, que ce sont les images d'anonymes, mais qui montrent bien un très haut niveau de densité critique, à quel point l'image de la mort reste une question centrale, non seulement du point de vue socio-philosophique, mais aussi du point de vue esthétique.
This series shows the electric chair in Sing Sing prison. It is an empty, brutal throne. The violent symbol of a society where death and showbiz are intertwined. The house in Lexington had become too small for Warhol. He needed work assistance, and he had to find somewhere to store his mass productions. Meeting Gérard Malanga was useful. He was a student, a young poet, with a flamboyant mane of brown hair. In January 1964, they invested in a disused factory, which they covered in aluminium and silver paint. The mythical factory was born.
It was a factory, it was a hat factory. But when we saw the space, it was empty, it was dark, it was, gloomy. It was not a very enthusiastic space, but Andy saw something, the possibilities. And so Andy signed a lease, and then we moved into the space.
Je suis arrivée à la factory. Vous savez, c'était un ascenseur, comme dans les vrais lofts autrefois. Quand vous ouvriez la porte de l'ascenseur, les grilles, vous étiez dans le loft. Il n'y avait pas d'entrée, pas de porte, pas de rien.
C'est un atelier. Warhol avait la factory, c'était une autre forme d'avoir un atelier parce qu'il aimait être entouré par des folles, par des gens qui se droguaient, par des gens qui se travestissaient.
Warhol really liked strange people. I think he liked people in general. I think he really studied, personalities, and he liked having a lot of different people. And it was this idea of mixing really amazing people from high society and low society, and maybe kind of creating some friction, see what happens.
The factory was a place to hang out in and meet people. It was a place of spontaneous experimentation. Very soon, a modern hybrid lifestyle developed there. Work, artificial paradises, and all-night parties all merged into one. Andy Warhol created his own superstars there. These men, women, and transvestites were models and muses, fashioned in the image of the Hollywood dream factory of his childhood. The place acted as a magnet for fashionable New Yorkers. Andy Warhol always remained slightly aloof. He was both at the centre of things and in the background, a voyeur.
People thought that everyone was hanging around me at the factory, but it was the opposite. I was hanging around them.
We didn't really know what was going on at the factory, and at the same time, he didn't really bring too many people home from the factory, so he liked it that way, I think, because at home he had his privacy, a certain amount of peacefulness, and especially his mother, who took care of him. I think that was really important for him to grow as an artist.
In 1965, out of the blue, Andy Warhol announced that he was going to stop painting and focus on filmmaking.
I remember at that time in the mid-60s when he said he was giving up painting, and it just didn't make sense that he would give up painting when he became so successful. But then he was doing films, and there again, I don't think anybody understood the films because they were kind of artsy, strange films.
New York was going, and not only New York, but also the West Coast, San Francisco. There were new movements in cinema to expand the forms of cinema from just narrative, storytelling, Hollywood kind of public cinema into poetic forms of cinema and abstract forms of cinema.
Jonas Mekas, a pioneer of experimental cinema, ran the only New York cinema showing underground films.
The first series of films that Andy brought to me were a series of kisses. He decided to project it not at normal speed, but slowed down. That was a genius stroke, really. If you project it 24 frames per second, it's a little bit boring, naturalistic. But when you slow it down, it becomes like super reality. A little bit of a dream is brought in on reality. What was in the air at that time in all of the arts was like art in time, but he brought it to cinema. Main contribution was to go back to the origins of cinema and to reinvent it. He was the Lumiere of the 60s.
Using primitive filmmaking techniques with no editing, Warhol observed day-to-day life. His films are like pictures, barely moving. His filmmaking was a continuation of his painting. At that time, Agnès Varda, the director of Cléo de 5 à 7, was also working on temporality in films. She was in New York, and she had come to the factory because she had plans to work with one of Warhol's superstars, Viva.
Nous, la petite nouvelle vague, quand on arrivait en Amérique, on était connus comme tels. Donc, Andy était content de me voir. Très gentiment, il m'a accueilli, on a parlé de choses et d'autres. Et je lui ai dit, entre autres, que je voulais rencontrer Viva pour la faire tourner. Alors il lui a dit, Viva, you must work with her. She's great, she's great. Alors, Viva, s'en foutait, quoi. Et il a dit, she made a wonderful film, Cleo from 5 to 7. If I had made it, I would have shot between 5 and 7. Ça, c'était le mot de la fin, quoi. Il l'aurait fait en 2 heures, moi je l'ai fait en 2 mois. Mais moi, ça m'a énormément plu de venir de France, où on était quand même classique, sage, surtout dans les années 60. Tous essayaient d'écarter les perceptions classiques, d'écarter les représentations classiques. Et Warhol, sur ça, c'est un pionnier formidable.
His most radical film was Empire. It was a static shot of the Empire State Building, shot in July 1964. Screened in slow motion, the film lasted 8 hours, with no shot changes.
People really hated his movies, the early movies. When we showed Empire in the movie theater, people were throwing things at the screen. And Andy was getting worried because we were standing in the back of the theater. He said to me, do you think they really hate it? Oh, yeah, I think they do.
Il a révolutionné le cinéma simplement en s'attaquant au temps, dans sa continuité. C'est-à-dire que c'est très important que quelqu'un ait fait ça. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'on va se précipiter voir ça tous les jours au cinéma. Mais c'est un vrai tournant pour moi dans le cinéma. Après, on n'a jamais pu voir le temps tout à fait pareil. Moi, je pense qu'il y a le cinéma d'avant Andy Warhol et le cinéma d'après.
Andy Warhol shot nearly 60 films over 5 years, experimenting with filmmaking on the same industrial scale that he made paintings. He dreamt of running his own avant-garde studios and wanted to see his name associated with a rock band. In 1965, he went with Gerard Malanga to a concert at Café Bazaar. Velvet Underground were playing.
So we actually went down to see them perform, and this was a matinee, like, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in this cafe in Greenwich Village. There was no stage, it was just the same floor. And there were tables with young kids at the different tables. It wasn't an auditorium or anything. And I just happened to have a whip with me as a fashion accoutrement, just to tie it on my belt. And at some point I took the whip off my belt and I started dancing with the whip while they're performing. Well, within 5 minutes, everybody at the tables got up off the chairs and they started dancing too. No one was dancing at the beginning.
Warhol was instantly seduced by their raw and poetic style. It was a sort of erotic wild lament with crude lyrics. Warhol offered Velvet the use of the factory to rehearse in.
Nobody took it seriously. Nobody felt at that time that it will be that important. Actually, we thought that Nico, she was just a very bad singer, and it was just part of that of life.
Lou Reed, when he and Andy kind of connected, I think that something special happened. They were both breaking new ground, and I think that it was an exciting period to be there in New York doing what they were doing. That was part of my uncle's concept of bringing it all together in one big kind of artistic performance.
Velvet became part of the factory, giving it a new, more rock and underground identity. Punk before its time. It was a hysterical time, with more and more people turning up at the factory. In 1968, the spirit of provocation and impertinence gained momentum. It was a violent and worrying time in the history of America.
CBS News in New York with a special report on Martin Luther King, the aftermath.
The assassination of Martin Luther King triggered riots in most of the big cities.
The Negro community is clearly angry, often uncontrollably angry.
In the spring, the building housing the silver factory was to be demolished. They had to move out. Warhol found the ideal place in this building in the south of Manhattan. A new factory which was to be the scene of a tragic episode. One of the weird and wonderful people hanging out at the factory was Valerie Solanas. She was openly gay and had just published the Scum Manifesto, a radical feminist pamphlet.
Elle était enragée, cette Valérie. Elle faisait partie d'un groupe qui s'appelait Scum, Society to Cut Up Men. Grand projet de castrer les hommes.
One day, Valerie Solanas offered Andy a film script. The title was Up Your Ass. He wasn't interested, and after a while, he announced to her that he had lost the script. On the afternoon of the 3rd of June 1968, Valerie Solanas showed up at the new factory again.
She was waiting in the lobby, and they actually rode the elevator up together. And he had a phone conversation with Viva, and I guess she was at the beauty salon having her hair done. Solanas pulled out her gun and shot him while he was on the phone. Warhol was crouched over like this when the bullet hit him, and so it came through the side like this instead of this way, and it passed through like something like 5 or 6 or 7 organs. It took a while for the ambulance to come. When he got to the hospital, he was very near death. He had lost a lot of blood. They operated for about 5.5 hours. After the surgery, he was laying in his hospital room, and he thought that he had died because he could hear on the television that Kennedy had been shot.
Young Robert Kennedy first won fame.
He thought that that's what happened when you die. You just relive history. And he had no idea that it was Robert Kennedy who had been shot. This is what he claimed anyway.
My oldest brother, Paul, was studying to be a priest. He stayed with my uncle for a few months. During that summer, it was a really traumatic experience for everybody, and for especially my uncle, because it took him many months to recover from that.
He was discharged after 2 months of convalescence. He'd come through it, but he was very weak.
Il a dit, je suis un survivant.
Il va avoir le sentiment, dit-il, de vivre là, du coup, dans un autre monde, un monde beaucoup plus incertain. Il dit à un moment, je crois, je n'avais peur que de Dieu seul, et maintenant tout a changé. Cette photo est absolument invraisemblable. Il y a une trace là qui doit être montrée. Ça témoigne aussi de sa capacité à prendre des distances de façon majestueuse. Et cette photo, ce sont les stigmates de cette presque mort qu'il a endurée et la preuve de sa résurrection.
It was a big turning point for his career. I think his work had changed. I think his personality changed a little. I think it was just a natural way of him shifting and being more careful. But creatively, it was definitely, I think, a step down.
In the years that followed, Andy Warhol was fearful, and his fear was deep-rooted. He was so traumatized, he made a clean sweep. His former associates left the factory. No more superstars, no more marginals. By giving up this community, which had inspired him for all those years, he lost his creativity.
Voilà, pour lui, la différence, c'est que les années 70 sont vides. C'est peut-être de ça dont traite sa production des années 70, le vide.
In May 1969, Esquire's cover featured Andy Warhol drowning in a tin of Campbell's soup. The headline was unambiguous: the final decline and total collapse of the American avant-garde. In 1970, Andy Warhol carried on creating a void around him and sent his mother to Pittsburgh to live with his brothers. Julia died on the 22nd of November 1972. As with 30 years previously on the death of his father, Andy didn't go to the funeral and didn't speak to anyone about his mother's death. A new factory was born out of his fears, the office. Now neurotically obsessed with death, he sought refuge in the practice of compulsively recording everything. His tape recorder and Polaroid camera never left his side. He changed, hiding behind his viewfinder as a way of seeing without being seen, of being present but not really there.
He blurred the high and low line. He was constantly criticized by the New York art establishment for going out too much. His way of working was to be out in the world. He was tape recording everybody. I videotaped all the time. He was taking Polaroids of people. Documentation of his time was part of his art and what he wanted to do.
Andy Warhol changed worlds and environments. He was gradually moving into the world of money.
C'est plus du tout la même chose, c'est des hommes d'affaires avec la petite mallette qui viennent, qui sortent, il tourne plus de films, il dirige l'interview, il fait des émissions de télévision, il y a un changement complet.
1971 is the beginning of doing portraits. Fred Hughes is a business manager and close confidant, and Bruno Bischofberger, his Swiss dealer, really developed this idea of doing portrait commissions, which was a way of making money. And Andy understood the art historical importance of that, because in the history of art, the courts of Europe always had portraits commissioned of the wealthy people of the time, the lords.
During the 70s, Warhol sold his talent. Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Grace Jones, and numerous other stars commissioned portraits. He produced between 50 and 100 of them a year for astronomical sums. This work was neither personal nor political. He just churned them out. These portraits came to overshadow his return to darker and more intimate work. In 1976, Warhol made Skulls, a screen-printed series of 60 skulls. As if returning from the dead, he seemed to drop his mask and confront his audience head-on, revealing his mystical obsessions for the first time. In 1978, he produced the mysterious Shadows. These abstract shadows were reproduced ad infinitum. They gave us a glimpse of his obscure, hallucinatory dreams.
There is a possibility that he was becoming more spiritual in his work and a little more introverted, like the abstract paintings.
The shadow paintings really made the art critics stop in their tracks because they didn't know what to make of it. They are so spiritual, so beautiful and ethereal.
La toute fin de l'œuvre de Warhol est au moins aussi extraordinaire que la toute première. Les ombres, c'est quelque chose de prodigieux. Il y a aussi les camouflages qui sont prodigieux. Il y a les peintures au diamant, les peace painting. Toute la fin, c'est comme un pommier qui va mourir, vous savez, il fait beaucoup de fleurs.
Andy Warhol seemed to sense the arrival of his own death. His works are now openly religious. His final work in 1987 was a variation on Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper.
He painted The Last Supper in 1986, shortly before his death. Most Carpathian Russians in their living room or kitchen, wherever they ate, they would have some sort of picture or resemblance of the Last Supper to remind them of that very important event. That was a part of his life that he didn't talk much about. But I believe at that point in his life, he really needed to get it out. It was his way of communicating. It wasn't like he was going to stand on top of a soapbox and say, hey, I'm religious. That was his quiet way of saying, look, I am very religious and this is important to me and I'm going to paint something that's very close to my heart.
C'est l'avantage du succès, c'est que ça vous libère quand même d'un certain nombre de contraintes. Et il exploite ce succès en partie pour faire quelque chose qu'il avait sans doute envie de faire depuis longtemps. Il peut explicitement renouer avec des thématiques chrétiennes, les prendre comme sujet de sa peinture. Il rend explicite ce qui était implicite dans un certain nombre de ses tableaux des années 60.
On the 22nd of February 1987, Andy Warhol died, aged 58, of a heart attack following a routine gallbladder operation. In New York, 2,000 people attended a mass to pay tribute to him. The speeches made by the artist's nearest and dearest gave the public a glimpse of just how religious he had been.
We didn't learn until after his death he would go to a homeless shelter in New York and hang out with the homeless the whole day. And he didn't even tell us. And it's probably not the image that most people think of Andy Warhol, but I mean, all the other stuff is there. You know, this is just another side that makes him that much more, you know, intriguing and special.
But we never talked about personal things very much. Andy didn't like to touch upon those things. I knew he was going to church, because if you picked him up on a Sunday from his home, he stopped at the church nearby, went in. I would wait outside, he'd go in for a few minutes and come back out. He didn't talk about these. This is all private.
I kind of miss this personal contact that I had with him, and he was always interested in what I was doing, and he'd tell me something new that he was doing. You know, he was always Uncle Andy to us, so